It was 8:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the sky above the Midwest was deceptively calm. Golden sunlight spilled across the tarmac of Midland International Airport, bouncing off the polished wings of a mid-sized commercial airliner preparing for its routine flight to Dallas. Inside the plane, the cabin hummed with ordinary morning energy. Passengers settling into their seats, flight attendants arranging pillows and checking overhead compartments, and the low murmur of conversations blending with the squeak of rolling luggage. In row 8 sat Emily Carter, a 22-year-old college student with curly brown hair that refused to be tamed, oversized headphones over her ears, and a backpack stuffed with textbooks, a laptop, and a worn flight simulator joystick she occasionally used for practice. To anyone looking, she was just another student, sleepy and distracted, scrolling through her notes for the upcoming history exam. She wasn't thinking about heroism. She wasn't thinking about adventure. She was thinking about the essay she had procrastinated on and the cup of coffee she hadn't finished. Around her, the flight buzzed with small routines. A mother trying to calm a crying toddler, businessmen thumbing through their tablets, teenagers arguing quietly over music playlists. The mundane rhythm of a commercial flight was comforting, almost hypnotic. Emily exhaled, leaning her head back against the seat, and closed her eyes. Then, without warning, the plane lurched. A low metallic groan reverberated through the cabin. Heads jerked up, conversations halted mid-sentence. The humming engine stuttered once-twice, sending a ripple of unease through the rows. A faint but distinct clank echoed from the cargo hold below, a sound that didn't belong. Emily opened her eyes, her heart suddenly racing. She had flown simulators before, trained in emergency procedures, but this was real. The subtle vibrations of panic in the cabin sent a chill down her spine. Around her, passengers were beginning to notice, their nervous glances bouncing from the ceiling to the aisles. The male captain, a 45-year-old veteran with a face carved from years of experience, appeared on the intercom. His voice, usually calm and steady, had an unusual edge of tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, taking a breath that seemed to carry the weight of a storm. "We are experiencing a technical issue. I need to ask, are there any passengers trained in aircraft operations or combat flight on board?" The cabin fell silent. Confused whispers rippled like a low tide. A teenage boy in row 14 scoffed nervously, muttering to his friend, "What is this, some kind of joke?" An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter, eyes wide with alarm. A man in a business suit looked up from his phone, frowning, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mind raced. Combat flight, emergency procedure. She wasn't a professional pilot, not officially, but she had spent countless hours on simulators, learning maneuvers, studying cockpit instruments, and memorizing emergency protocols. She'd even taken a week-long cadet program in high school, a program her parents thought was just a summer camp. Now, that camp felt like the only thing standing between the passengers and disaster. Time seemed to stretch as she glanced down the aisle. The captain's gaze swept methodically across the cabin, pausing briefly on passengers who shook their heads or looked away. And then, it landed on her. "Row 8, Emily Carter. Is there any combat pilot on board?" His voice was sharp now, cutting through the cabin's low hum like a knife. Emily's throat went dry. Her instincts screamed at her to hide, to shrink into her seat and pretend she was invisible. But another part, the part trained for action, for focus under pressure, kicked in. Without thinking, she raised her hand. The cabin erupted into murmurs. Some passengers laughed nervously, thinking it was a prank. Others froze, staring at her as if she had just confessed to something impossible. The captain's eyebrows shot up, a flicker of disbelief crossing his seasoned face. He gestured for her to step forward. "You, row 8, are you serious?" "Yes, sir," Emily said, her voice quieter than she felt but surprisingly steady. I can help." The co-pilot peeked over the captain's shoulder, a skeptical frown on his face. "She's a student, sir. How?" "Just trust me," the captain muttered, his jaw tight, eyes darting to the warning panels flashing ominously. The plane groaned again, a deep metallic shudder that sent papers skittering across trays and passengers gripping armrests. Emily's stomach dropped. This was no longer a hypothetical exercise. Every instinct in her body screamed urgency. A flight attendant, hovering nearby, leaned in, whispering, "Are you sure about this?" Emily met her gaze. "I don't have a choice." The captain led her toward the cockpit. The cabin seemed to shrink, the air thickening with a tension so sharp it almost hurt. From her seat in row 8, Emily could see the reactions of the other passengers, the mixture of fear, disbelief, and hope reflected in their eyes. Every step she took toward the front of the plane made her heart pound harder, yet each step also steadied her resolve. The cockpit door opened with a soft metallic click. Inside, the scene was chaos. Red warning lights blinked furiously. The flight instruments rattled and buzzed. The co-pilot's hands flew over the controls. The captain's face was pale, his normally confident expression replaced with raw, unspoken worry. "Emily," he said, his voice almost breaking, "if this doesn't work," he trailed off, letting the silence hang heavy between them. Emily swallowed hard, scanning the panels. Engine readings fluctuated dangerously. The hydraulic system was unstable. The plane shuddered violently again, and she could feel the vibrations in her bones. She swallowed her fear, letting the adrenaline sharpen her mind. Passengers in row 8 craned their necks, catching glimpses of the cockpit and Emily standing there, trying to mask the storm inside her. Mothers clutched children. Businessmen whispered hurried prayers. The plane itself seemed to groan under the weight of an unseen threat. Emily took a deep breath, her hands brushing over the controls in a way she'd only practiced in simulators. She wasn't officially trained for combat flight, but she had memorized every critical procedure, every maneuver that could stabilize a failing aircraft. She had no choice now. The captain turned to her, his eyes piercing hers. "Are you ready?" Emily nodded, even as her heart threatened to explode. The plane lurched again, sending a ripple of panic through the cabin. From row 8, Emily could see the passengers gripping their armrests, eyes wide with fear. She clenched her fists, feeling the weight of responsibility descend on her. One wrong move could mean catastrophe. She knew she had to act, and act fast. Emily's fingers trembled as she followed the captain into the cockpit. The smell of electronics and jet fuel mixed with the tang of fear that clung to the cabin. She had been in simulators countless times, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The real, vibrating, living aircraft under her fingertips, alive with danger. The captain gestured to the co-pilot. "Status." The co-pilot, a young man barely in his 30s, ran through a string of rapid commands, voice tense. "Engines fluctuating. Hydraulics failing intermittently. We're losing altitude fast." Emily's pulse quickened. She leaned over the throttle, scanning the instrument panels like her life depended on it, because it did. "Step aside, I need to see everything at once," she said, her voice firm despite the pounding of her heart. She wasn't trying to command authority, she needed clarity. The captain hesitated but nodded. Emily's eyes flicked across the dials, lights, and screens. She felt a flash of panic. A false maneuver now could shred the wings or stall the plane. Yet she also felt an odd calm, a clarity that only comes when instinct and preparation collide. "Throttle fluctuations are minor," she said, her voice cutting through the alarms. "If we redistribute power and adjust pitch simultaneously, we can stabilize the descent temporarily." The captain blinked. You know what you're doing." "I've trained," she replied, swallowing back the adrenaline. "Not officially, but I know the mechanics. We can buy time." The co-pilot frowned, clearly skeptical. "You're a student, right?" Emily's eyes met his. "Yes, but I've flown simulations for hours. I've memorized emergency protocols. I need to act now." Outside the cockpit window, the sky was a wall of gray turbulence, clouds churning like angry seas. Sunlight slashed through in violent streaks, illuminating the anxious faces of passengers through the tiny windows. Each jolt of the plane made her stomach leap, but she forced herself to focus. "Passengers," Emily asked, "what's their status?" The captain shook his head. "Row 8 is everyone's looking at you. They're terrified, yes, but some seem to trust you. No time to explain, we need action." Emily swallowed. She could feel the weight of every life on the plane, the future of hundreds resting in her inexperienced hands. And yet, there was no room for hesitation. "Captain," she said, pointing to the instruments, "we have a secondary issue. The left hydraulic system is spiking. If we don't compensate, the plane will tilt violently. I need full control on the throttle and you guide the stabilizers." The captain hesitated for the briefest moment before nodding, eyes scanning hers for the tiniest hint of doubt. He found none. "Okay," he said, voice low but firm. "You lead, we follow." Emily positioned herself, her hands hovering over the controls, heart pounding. Every jolt of the plane, every blaring alarm, every creak of metal beneath them felt magnified. She recalled a maneuver she had practiced endlessly in simulators, a risky but precise adjustment of throttle and pitch that could steady a plane with failing hydraulics. "This is it," she muttered to herself. She executed the maneuver, breathing in sync with the plane's rhythm, every motion deliberate. The aircraft shuddered violently, throwing the captain slightly against the console. Emily's pulse raced, but the plane's angle began to stabilize. A collective sigh of relief echoed from the passengers, muffled through the walls. Mothers clutched children, businessmen leaned back, and a few teens whispered prayers, all unaware of how close they had come to disaster. But relief was fleeting. The left engine coughed and sputtered. Sparks flickered on the instrument panel. The plane tilted again. Emily's jaw tightened. "We need to reduce speed before it destabilizes further. Captain, help me balance manually." The captain followed her instructions, adjusting stabilizers, his hands steadying only slightly as adrenaline surged through him. For the first time, he looked at Emily not as a student, not as a child, but as a pilot, someone who could make life-and-death decisions in seconds. A loud bang shook the plane. Sparks flew from a secondary panel. The co-pilot shouted, "We're losing altitude faster than expected. Brace." Emily's stomach dropped, and panic clawed at the edges of her mind. But she forced herself to push it down, focusing on what she knew: throttle adjustments, pitch angles, emergency procedures. "Passengers," she shouted over the alarms, "brace for turbulence, stay seated." From row 8 she could see frightened eyes glued to her, mouths open, hands gripping armrests. In that moment she realized that they weren't just passengers, they were counting on her. And that realization pushed fear aside, replaced by resolve. The plane lurched again, violent and sudden. Oxygen masks dangled from above, though they weren't yet needed. Sparks continued to flicker on the console, every second stretched into eternity. Emily took a deep breath. She remembered a tip from her cadet instructor: in moments of extreme stress, focus on the rhythm of the aircraft and move with it, not against it. She let instinct guide her hands, aligning her actions with the tremors and shakes of the fuselage. The plane tilted dangerously, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it felt like it might flip. Emily's fingers flew across the controls, her mind calculating angles, speeds, and trajectories in seconds. The captain held his breath beside her. The co-pilot's jaw was clenched so tight it hurt to watch. Then a sudden lurch, an almost imperceptible shift, but enough. The plane steadied, not perfectly but just enough to give them a fighting chance. Emily exhaled, heart hammering in her chest, sweat sliding down her back. She dared a glance at the passengers through the cockpit window. Some were crying. Some were frozen in disbelief. But their eyes had a spark now: recognition, awe, and a fragile glimmer of hope. The captain's voice broke the tense silence. You're not just a student, you know what you're doing. Emily swallowed hard, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I've trained. Not officially, but enough to help now. The co-pilot muttered under his breath, disbelief coloring his tone. I can't believe this. She's actually doing it. Emily's eyes flicked to the instruments. The warnings were still there. The engines were still unstable. The plane was not safe yet. Every second of calm was temporary, a brief lull before the storm returned. And then came the loudest, most alarming jolt yet, a shudder that ran through the entire fuselage. Sparks flew, smoke curled along a vent, and the warning lights flashed red with relentless urgency. Emily's stomach dropped. The plane groaned as if alive, protesting, demanding perfection she couldn't fully guarantee. She gritted her teeth, forcing her hands to steady. The captain looked at her, pale, eyes wide. Emily, we might not make it if it keeps going like this. Her mind raced. Every scenario she had memorized in the simulators, every emergency landing, every maneuver, every contingency, all of it now had to be applied in real time. She swallowed, the taste of adrenaline thick in her mouth. I'll do everything I can, she said, almost to herself. Outside the cockpit window, the sky was a violent swirl of gray and white. Clouds churned like angry seas. Lightning flickered in the distance. The turbulence intensified, tossing the plane as if the weather itself were challenging her skill and courage. The cockpit was a storm of lights, sounds, and motion. Alarms blared in sharp, urgent tones, punctuated by the metal groans of stressed machinery. Emily's pulse raced, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum of warning. She had never felt such raw intensity in any simulator or classroom exercise. This was real, every decision a matter of life or death. The captain, normally composed and steady, was pale, eyes flicking frantically across the warning panels. The co-pilot's hands flew over the controls, but he was struggling to keep up with the oscillating readings. Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to push panic aside and focus. Left engine stability, she asked, her voice calm but urgent. Erratic, the captain replied. It's spiking, dropping. We can't stabilize it for more than a few seconds. Emily's mind raced. She scanned the panels, calculating the plane's speed, angle, and altitude. Her fingers hovered over the throttle, ready to act. Every movement had to be precise. One wrong adjustment and the fuselage could tear, the wings could fail. The plane shuddered violently, and a loud clank echoed from below. The fuselage groaned like a living creature under strain. Passengers in row 8 and beyond could hear the commotion, their muffled cries and gasps filtering through the cockpit door. Emily tried to focus on the instruments, blocking out the fear that gripped the cabin. We need to reduce speed before the hydraulics fail completely, she said, hands moving quickly. Captain, I'll take full throttle control. You guide the stabilizers. The captain hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. Understood, you lead. Emily's hands danced over the controls, adjusting throttle, pitch, and flaps with practiced precision. The plane lurched and tilted dangerously, throwing the co-pilot against his console. Sparks flickered on one of the panels, and smoke began to curl from a vent near the rear of the cockpit. Brace for turbulence, Emily shouted over the alarms. Her voice cut through the chaos, firm and commanding. The plane pitched again, throwing everyone inside against their seats. Oxygen masks hung uselessly above passengers' heads. Mothers clutched children, strangers grabbed each other's hands, and the deafening roar of metal straining under stress filled the cabin. Emily's stomach dropped, but she refused to look away from the instruments. She recalled a maneuver she had practiced endlessly, a combination of throttle redistribution and precise pitch adjustments that could stabilize a failing aircraft, buying precious time. It was risky. One miscalculation could send the plane into an uncontrollable spin. Left engine fluctuating, the co-pilot shouted. We're losing altitude. Emily's mind raced. calculating angles, speeds, and trajectories in a split second. She adjusted the throttle, applied gentle pressure on the rudder, and nudged the stabilizers. The plane shuddered violently, then, just slightly, began to level. The captain exhaled sharply, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. You're not just a student. You're keeping us alive." Emily swallowed hard. "I've trained in simulations. Not officially, but I know the procedures. We can do this, but we have to act fast." The co-pilot muttered under his breath, disbelief evident. "I can't believe this. She's actually doing it." Outside, the sky was a maelstrom of gray clouds and violent winds. Lightning forked across the horizon, briefly illuminating the terrified faces of passengers through the windows. Each jolt of the plane felt like it might tear it apart. Emily's hands flew over the controls, instinct guiding her through a landscape of danger she had never experienced before. Another violent lurch threw Emily forward. She barely caught herself on the console. Sparks sprayed from the secondary panel and smoke filled the cockpit. The plane was pitching sharply downward. Every second stretched to infinity, every choice a gamble with life itself. "Captain," Emily said, voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "We need to stabilize for emergency landing. I can do it, but I need full control and clear instructions from you." The captain nodded, gripping the edge of his console. "Do it." Emily centered herself, letting instinct and training merge into action. She adjusted throttle and pitch, leaned with the plane's motion, and focused entirely on the instruments. The plane shuddered violently but gradually began to level. "Passengers are reacting," the captain said, glancing at the monitors. "They can see you. Some are crying. Some, I think they actually believe you can save us." Emily swallowed. She didn't have time to process the recognition or admiration. Every second counted. The plane was not safe. One misstep could send it into a tailspin. "Co-pilot," she said, "prepare for manual stabilization. Follow my instructions exactly. We cannot afford mistakes." The co-pilot's jaw was clenched, but he nodded. Sparks continued to flicker on the panels, alarms screamed, and the metallic groan of the fuselage under stress echoed like a living thing in pain. Emily adjusted the throttle, nudged the rudder, and coordinated with the captain. The plane tilted again, violently. Sweat ran down her back. Every muscle tensed, every heartbeat synchronized with the trembling aircraft. Then came the loudest jolt yet, shaking the plane violently. The warning lights flashed red in unison, and the cockpit filled with acrid smoke. The captain's voice was taut with fear. "Emily, this might be it. We may not make it if it keeps going like this." Emily's stomach churned. The weight of every life on board pressed down on her chest. She had never felt such absolute responsibility before. She took a deep breath, forcing her mind to focus, to block fear, to rely entirely on her training. "Hold on," she muttered, almost to herself. "We're not done yet." She executed a risky maneuver she had only ever performed in simulators, tilting the plane, redistributing power, and applying gentle but precise rudder pressure. The plane shuddered violently, then, against all odds, stabilized enough to prevent a catastrophic spin. The captain let out a long, shaky exhale, his face pale but awed. I can't believe it. You actually stabilized it." Emily wiped sweat from her brow. "Temporarily, we still need to land." The co-pilot's disbelief had turned into cautious respect. You've got nerves of steel. I don't know how else to say it." Emily barely had time to acknowledge the comment before the plane lurched again. A metallic clank echoed from the rear, alarms shrieked, and the fuselage groaned. Smoke began to drift more heavily across the cockpit. The captain's voice was tight. "Emily, we need a plan. The runway, emergency landing. Do you see anything we can work with?" Emily's gaze shot to the horizon, peering through the thick curtain of storm clouds. She spotted the faint outline of the nearest airstrip, a military training runway, clear of planes but surrounded by uneven terrain and power lines. It wasn't ideal, but it was a chance. "We'll divert to that airstrip," she said. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." The captain nodded, tension visible in every line of his face. "Do it. I trust you." Emily's hands clenched the controls. She had stabilized the plane once, but this next phase, navigating through storm, turbulence, failing engines, and unpredictable winds, would test every ounce of her skill. The cockpit was a storm of lights, alarms, and tension. Emily's hands gripped the controls with white-knuckled intensity, her fingers moving with the precision of years of practice, even if none of it had ever been tested in real life. Outside, the sky was a writhing mass of gray and white clouds, lightning illuminating the twisted turbulence like a strobe, casting terrifying shadows across the cabin. "Emily," the captain said, voice tight, almost unrecognizable in its fear, "there's another aircraft approaching the runway from the opposite direction. I think it's a cargo jet. We might have seconds to avoid collision." Emily's heart lurched. Seconds. She had literally seconds to calculate, adjust, and maneuver a massive, damaged aircraft through violent turbulence while maintaining altitude and controlling failing hydraulics. Her stomach knotted. One misstep now could end them all. She leaned forward, eyes scanning every instrument, every warning light, every tiny shift of the plane beneath her. Every training session, every simulator drill, every textbook calculation she had ever absorbed crystallized into this moment. "Co-pilot," Emily said, her voice calm but commanding, "monitor that aircraft. Keep me updated on its trajectory. Captain, we'll need full stabilizer adjustments on my mark." The captain nodded, his hands gripping the console as if it were the only anchor in the chaos. Sparks flickered again from the dashboard. Smoke curled upward, acrid and stinging. Emily took a deep breath, centering herself. She whispered under her breath, almost as if saying a silent mantra, "Focus. One move at a time." The plane shuddered violently as the gusts hit. She adjusted the throttle, nudged the rudder, and applied a delicate bank. The aircraft tilted sharply, metal creaking under stress, but gradually responded to her corrections. The approaching cargo jet was a looming shadow in the distance, its lights cutting through the storm. Emily's mind raced. If she miscalculated the bank angle or speed by even a fraction, the two planes could collide over the runway, a catastrophe unimaginable. "Prepare for evasive maneuver," she said. 3 seconds. Time seemed to slow. She focused only on the instruments, blocking out the terrified cries and gasps of passengers. She could feel the planes shuddering through the controls, each vibration a message she had to interpret instantly. 2-1. Emily executed a sharp bank, pulling the damaged plane into a controlled roll. The fuselage groaned, alarms blaring, sparks showering from the console, but the aircraft responded. The cargo jet adjusted its trajectory in response to the sudden movement, barely clearing their path. The captain exhaled, almost collapsing against the console in relief. "By God, you did it," he muttered. Emily didn't have time to savor the moment. The plane was still unstable. The left engine was spiking erratically, the hydraulics were still failing intermittently, and the ground below was approaching faster than she wanted. "Passengers," Emily said, her voice carrying urgency. "Brace, we're preparing for an emergency landing." From row 8, she could see the passengers gripping armrests, eyes wide with terror. Mothers held children tight, strangers held each other's hands, and a few teens whispered frantic prayers. Emily's stomach knotted, but she pushed down panic with every ounce of concentration she had. She adjusted the throttle again, nudged the rudder, and coordinated with the captain. The plane tilted violently, then stabilized just enough to begin the descent. The runway at the military airstrip loomed through the storm, a faint sliver of asphalt illuminated by emergency lights. But the turbulence was unrelenting, the plane shaking like a living thing in agony. Emily's hands ached from the tension, but she refused to let go. "Steady, steady," she muttered, guiding the plane through gusts and wind shear. Every second felt like hours. The fuselage groaned as metal strained under stress. Sparks flew from the control panel, smoke curling around the cockpit. Suddenly, another jolt sent the plane banking sharply to the right. Emily's stomach flipped. The landing gear warning light flashed red, signaling a potential failure. "Captain," she said, her voice tight, "we may have to land without full gear deployment. I need you to guide me on the stabilizers for impact reduction." The captain nodded, pale but resolute. "Do it, I trust you." Emily focused, adjusting the throttle, rudder, and stabilizers with precise timing. The plane descended sharply, gusts of wind battering the fuselage. The runway seemed impossibly far, but she guided the plane with unerring focus, every instinct firing at once. Passengers braced for impact, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Mothers clutched children, men gripped seats, some whispered prayers, others closed their eyes, waiting for the inevitable. Emily's pulse was a hammer in her chest, sweat sliding down her back. She could feel every vibration through the controls, every tremor in the metal beneath her. She remembered her simulator training, emergency landing without gear. But now it was real, life and death in every move. The plane shuddered violently as it touched the runway. Sparks flew where the tires met asphalt, metal grinding, alarms screaming. Emily adjusted the throttle to slow the plane gradually, keeping it as level as possible. The fuselage scraped, groaned, and screeched, but slowly, agonizingly, the plane began to decelerate. Passengers erupted in screams, some of terror, some of relief, as the plane skidded along the runway. Emily's hands shook as she kept control. The engines groaned, the hydraulics sputtered, but the aircraft remained on the runway. Finally, she brought it to a halt, the plane quivering but intact. The cockpit fell into stunned silence. The captain exhaled shakily, eyes wide. I don't know what to say. You saved us." Emily sank back, hands still on the controls, heart hammering. She had stabilized the plane, avoided a collision, and landed on a compromised runway. She had done the impossible, but she knew the danger wasn't fully over. Through the cockpit window, she could see the passengers' faces pressed against windows, their expressions a mix of awe, disbelief, and overwhelming relief. Mothers clutched children, strangers embraced, and some just sat frozen, processing what had just happened. Emily wiped sweat from her brow, allowing herself a brief, shaky breath. Sparks still flickered from the console, alarms still blared intermittently. The plane was not fully safe yet. "Passengers are safe for now," Emily said quietly, almost to herself. "But we're not out of danger yet." The captain finally turned to her, his voice trembling with awe and respect. "Emily, I've flown for 20 years. I've faced emergencies, turbulence, storms, but I've never seen anything like this." Emily barely nodded, exhaustion and adrenaline crashing over her. She knew the plane was still vulnerable. Every second now mattered. She had bought them time, but there was one final challenge left: stopping the aircraft completely without causing further damage or injury. The plane was trembling violently, like a caged beast on the brink of collapse. Sparks flickered from the console, smoke drifted lazily across the cockpit, and the alarms had evolved into a relentless, screaming wail. Emily's hands were locked on the controls, white-knuckled, her knuckles stiff from the tension, sweat streaming down her face. Through the cockpit window, the military airstrip appeared closer now, a thin strip of asphalt glowing faintly in the storm. The runway was their only lifeline. Everything depended on reaching it safely and stopping. Emily's stomach sank as another warning light flashed. The landing gear wasn't responding properly. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to push the fear down. She had trained for emergency landings without full gear, but never under these conditions: turbulent winds, failing hydraulics, and a plane that groaned under stress. One miscalculation now could tear the fuselage apart. "Passengers brace," Emily shouted over the alarms, her voice sharp, urgent. Through row 8, she could see them gripping their armrests, eyes wide, mothers holding children tight, strangers clasping hands in terrified solidarity. The cabin shuddered as the plane pitched again. The captain's face was pale but calm, his hands moving instinctively over the stabilizers. "Emily, you're doing fine, keep it steady." "Not steady yet," Emily muttered under her breath, scanning the instruments. The altitude was dropping faster than anticipated. The left engine was still spiking unpredictably. Sparks flickered ominously from the control panel. Every warning screamed a single truth. One false move and they were finished. The co-pilot's voice cut through the chaos. "We're entering the critical zone. Altitude's too low for corrections. Brace for impact." Emily's stomach flipped. She remembered her simulator training, the emergency procedures drilled into her until reflex became instinct. Adjust throttle, redistribute weight, maintain pitch, control descent. One step at a time. Focus. She adjusted the throttle, nudged the rudder, and applied delicate pressure on the stabilizers. The plane responded, shuddering violently but obeying. The runway approached, impossibly close. Winds lashed at the fuselage, rattling the windows, tossing the plane like a toy. Suddenly, the left wing jolted. Sparks showered across the dashboard. Smoke poured from a vent near the co-pilot's console. Emily's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She couldn't falter, not now. "Captain," she said, voice tight, "we may have to land without full gear. Prepare stabilizers for impact reduction." The captain nodded, tension etched into every line of his face. "Do it, I trust you." Emily took a deep breath, centering herself, blocking out everything except the instruments, the plane, and the runway ahead. She whispered a mantra she had learned in her cadet training: focus. One move at a time. The plane descended sharply, its nose dipping as she adjusted the throttle and rudder to compensate for the uneven hydraulics. The fuselage groaned, metal protesting, alarms screaming louder with each tremor. She could hear the passengers bracing, some screaming, some praying. A violent gust threw the plane slightly off course. Emily's hands flew across the controls, instinct guiding her actions. She tilted the aircraft, nudged the stabilizers, and realigned the nose with the runway. Sparks showered across the console again. Smoke thickened. The left engine groaned. "Almost there," she muttered, teeth gritted. The plane touched down partially, unevenly. The fuselage scraped the asphalt with a deafening screech. Sparks flew where the tires met the runway. Emily fought to keep it level, adjusting the throttle to decelerate without flipping or veering off the edge. The plane skidded, groaning, trembling with every meter it covered. The runway seemed endless, yet impossibly short. Passengers gripped their seats, eyes wide with terror, bodies tense, bracing for impact. Mothers clutched children, strangers whispered frantic prayers, teenagers closed their eyes, fearing the worst. Emily felt every vibration, every tremor in her bones. Her arms ached, her hands cramped, but she refused to release the controls. Every movement had to be precise. One wrong adjustment and the plane could jackknife or tip over. The landing gear finally locked partially, but the plane continued to scrape unevenly. Sparks flew from the tires as the friction burned against the tarmac. Emily adjusted throttle and stabilizers, fighting to keep the plane straight. The storm raged around them. Lightning flashed, illuminating terrified faces pressed against windows. The fuselage creaked under stress. Emily's stomach twisted with fear, adrenaline, and determination. She couldn't fail, not after all they had survived. With a final, desperate adjustment, she managed to slow the plane. The engines groaned to a halt, the fuselage shuddering, smoke curling upward. The plane had stopped. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. The alarm still screamed faintly, smoke drifted across the cockpit, but the plane had not tipped, not flipped, not collapsed. It was intact. Passengers erupted into screams, some of terror giving way to relief, others overwhelmed by disbelief. Mothers hugged children, strangers embraced, some knelt in silent gratitude. Emily sank back in her seat, chest heaving, sweat mixing with tears. The captain finally exhaled, voice trembling with awe. "Emily, I've flown for decades. I've faced emergencies, turbulence, storms, but I've never seen anything like this. You saved us all." Emily blinked, exhausted, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had done it. Against impossible odds, she had stabilized, maneuvered, and landed a crippled aircraft during a violent storm. Yet as she looked at the passengers, relief and awe on their faces, she realized she hadn't fully processed what had just happened. The co-pilot's jaw was slack, disbelief written across his face. I don't even know how to describe this. She's a miracle." Emily's hand still trembled on the controls, sweat and tears streaking her face. She had survived, and in doing so, had saved hundreds. But the realization was slow to sink in. The adrenaline buzz in her veins dulled only slightly, replaced by a gnawing exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. Then, through the fog of relief, she noticed something on the dashboard, a small, blinking warning light she hadn't seen before. Her stomach dropped. Even now, even after everything, the plane was not completely safe. The cockpit was thick with smoke, the acrid tang stinging Emily's nostrils. The warning lights pulsed red with unrelenting urgency, and the fuselage groaned beneath them like a living thing in pain. Passengers in row 8 and beyond clutched armrests, eyes wide, whispering frantic prayers as the plane's tremors rattled through every bone. Emily's heart pounded, adrenaline still coursing, though her arms ached from hours of tension. "Emily," the captain said, his voice tight with exhaustion and fear, "that warning light, whatever's failing now, it could compromise the brakes. If we try to taxi to the parking area, we might overshoot. If we stop here," he trailed off, letting the implication hang heavy between them. Emily's mind raced. She had seconds to weigh the options. One path risked sliding off the runway into uneven terrain, where the fuselage could break apart. The other risked a sudden stop that might damage the plane but would almost certainly preserve the passengers' lives. Her instinct screamed, but she forced herself to think rationally. "We need to make a controlled emergency stop here and now," she said, her voice firm. "It's risky, but it's our safest chance to protect everyone." The co-pilot swallowed hard, pale as the cabin lights reflected off his sweat-drenched face. "You're sure? This could tear the plane apart." "I know," Emily replied. "But if we try to taxi further, we may not make it. We have no choice." The captain nodded silently, placing his hand over hers on the controls. "Do it. I trust you. Lead us through this." Emily's pulse raced, every nerve on fire. She had stabilized the plane, avoided collisions, and maneuvered through a violent storm. Now came the most dangerous part, a full, controlled emergency stop on a damaged aircraft. "Passengers," she shouted over the alarms, "brace for impact, remain seated, hold tight." From row 8, Emily could see the panic reflected in every face. Mothers gripping children, businessmen clutching armrests, teenagers closing their eyes, some mouthing silent prayers. Their fear fed her focus, sharpened her instincts. She couldn't afford hesitation. The runway stretched before them, illuminated faintly through the storm. The plane shuddered violently as she guided it to the center line, nudging the throttle, adjusting stabilizers, calculating every millisecond of deceleration. The fuselage creaked, warning lights flared, and sparks danced from the damaged panels. "Almost there," Emily muttered, teeth gritted. Her hands moved with surgical precision, throttle adjustments, stabilizer nudges, every micro-movement critical to preventing disaster. The co-pilot's voice trembled. We're losing hydraulic pressure further. Brakes might not hold. We might skid off the runway." Emily's stomach twisted. She knew the plane's mass, the failing systems, the uneven surface of the tarmac ahead. She had to compensate with raw skill and instinct alone. Every decision counted. One miscalculation, one delay, and they could flip, slide, or break apart. "Captain, assist with stabilizers. Full coordination now," she instructed, voice calm even as her heart pounded. The captain complied, hands moving smoothly despite exhaustion. Together they guided the plane, negotiating each tremor, each bounce, each groan of stressed metal. Sparks flew from the dashboard, smoke curling thicker now, but the plane's momentum gradually decreased. Passengers braced, eyes wide with terror and awe. Mothers whispered reassurances to children, strangers clung to each other, and a few gasped, eyes fixed on the cockpit, as if sensing the calm, focused determination that guided the plane. Emily's hands ached, muscles trembling. Sweat stung her eyes. Every vibration in the fuselage echoed like a warning, a reminder that they were still in danger. But she refused to falter. She had come too far, survived too many impossible moments to fail now. A violent shudder ran through the plane. Sparks erupted from the panels, and the fuselage groaned with a deep, metallic wail. The landing gear struggled under the weight, threatening to collapse. Emily's stomach dropped. "Throttle control at minimum. Adjust stabilizers slowly," she muttered, focusing entirely on the instruments. The runway approached rapidly. She adjusted every variable she could, angle, speed, pitch. The plane responded with trembling obedience. Passengers clutched seats, some screaming, others silent, all aware that the next moments were critical. Mothers whispered prayers, teenagers held hands tightly, elderly passengers leaned forward, bracing themselves. With a final adjustment, Emily applied the controlled stop maneuver. The plane skidded, metal groaning and sparks showering, but gradually slowed. Each second was an eternity. Her hands burned from tension, her chest heaving, her entire body straining to maintain control. The plane finally ground to a halt, centerline intact, passengers shaken but alive. The alarms continued to blare faintly, smoke still curling, but the aircraft was stable. For the first time in what felt like hours, Emily allowed herself a moment to exhale. The cockpit was a haze of smoke, warning lights, and tension. The captain turned to her, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Emily, I don't know what to say. You saved us all." Emily's hands trembled on the controls. Sweat and tears mixed, streaking her face. She was exhausted, her body drained, but her mind was still sharp, processing every detail of the crisis she had just survived. The co-pilot finally found his voice, still pale but reverent. I've never seen anything like this. You're incredible." Emily barely nodded, exhaustion and adrenaline washing over her. She had survived, and so had everyone else on the plane, but the realization of what she had just done was only beginning to sink in. Through the cockpit window, she could see passengers pressing against windows, eyes wide with disbelief and awe. Mothers held children, strangers embraced, and some just sat frozen, processing the impossible. The captain exhaled, voice trembling. "You didn't just save this flight, you saved lives, hundreds of them, and you did it with nothing but instinct and courage." Emily allowed herself a brief, shaky smile, but her eyes remained fixed on the instruments. Sparks still flickered. Smoke curled through the cockpit. The plane was stable, but fragile. She knew better than anyone that emergencies were rarely over the moment the plane stopped moving. Then, a subtle but unmistakable noise caught her attention, a high-pitched whining from the rear of the plane. A new warning light flashed red on the dashboard, sending her stomach twisting into knots. She realized with a jolt that even now, even after everything, the plane was not entirely secure. There was still a system failing, something critical that could compromise their hard-won safety. The cockpit was thick with smoke now, acrid and choking. The alarm lights pulsed a relentless red, and Emily could hear the faint, high-pitched whining of a critical system failure echoing through the fuselage. Her fingers hovered over the controls, trembling, but her mind was sharper than ever. Every instinct, every second of simulation training, Every emergency procedure she had memorized converged into one singular focus: survival. The captain's voice broke through the haze. "Emily, whatever's failing, we need to contain it now. We can't risk a secondary failure. It could compromise the entire aircraft." Emily's heart pounded. She knew he was right. The plane was stable for the moment, but fragile. Any misstep, any delay could set off a chain reaction. The passengers, oblivious to the exact nature of the problem, were clinging to hope and terror in equal measure. Emily's hands clenched the controls tighter. "Co-pilot, monitor all systems," she commanded, her voice firm. "Every gauge, every warning light. Notify me immediately if anything deviates from normal." The co-pilot nodded, sweat streaming down his face, but his eyes betrayed the same disbelief the captain felt. "Understood. I don't know how you're staying this calm." Emily swallowed, forcing herself to breathe. Calm wasn't the point, it was precision. "We don't have time for panic," she said. "Focus on the instruments. I need to isolate the problem before it spreads." The red warning light pulsed again. Emily leaned forward, scanning the panels. It was coming from the rear hydraulic system, a vital mechanism controlling the plane's brake systems and stabilizers. If it failed completely, even after the emergency stop, the plane could slide or jackknife, risking total catastrophe. "All right," Emily muttered under her breath. "This is the critical part." She assessed her options. Manually overriding the failing hydraulics could work, but it required delicate coordination with the stabilizers, throttle, and rudder. Mistimed adjustments could shear the wings or rip the fuselage. She had practiced this in simulations, but never under the real-world stress of a screaming aircraft filled with terrified passengers. "Captain," she said, "I'm going to manually override the hydraulic system. I need full stabilizer support while I do this." The captain's jaw tightened. "Understood, I've got you, do it." Emily's fingers moved over the controls with surgical precision. Every movement counted. Every tremor in the fuselage communicated vital information. Sparks continued to flicker across the dashboard, smoke curling, the smell acrid in her lungs. The plane shuddered violently as she engaged the manual override. For a moment, nothing happened. The fuselage groaned under stress. The passengers braced instinctively, eyes wide, some screaming, some gripping loved ones. Then slowly the system began to respond. The whining noise from the rear subsided slightly. Stabilizers adjusted. Brakes engaged more firmly. The plane's trembling lessened. Emily's eyes never left the instruments. "Hold steady, steady," she muttered. Each movement of her hands was calculated, every adjustment precise. The plane was fighting her, but she was fighting back, channeling every ounce of focus into the survival of everyone aboard. The captain glanced at her, awe and fear mingling in his eyes. "Emily, you're incredible. Keep going. Don't let up." The co-pilot's voice was tense but hopeful. "Systems are stabilizing. I think it's holding." Emily's stomach twisted. She knew it wasn't fully safe yet. One misstep could undo everything. Sweat streamed down her face, mixing with tears she didn't allow herself to acknowledge. She adjusted the throttle slightly, nudged the rudder, and guided the plane with micro-corrections, each imperceptible to anyone but herself and the cockpit instruments. The runway stretched before them, a faint ribbon of light cutting through the storm, but Emily's focus remained entirely on the instruments. Passengers were still bracing, unaware of the final threat, holding onto hope and terror in equal measure. Another shudder ran through the fuselage. Sparks danced along the panels. Smoke thickened, curling like a living thing. Emily's hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. She had stabilized planes in simulations, yes, but this was real, and stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. "Almost there," she muttered under her breath, teeth gritted. The override was working, but she had to maintain perfect coordination until the plane was completely secure. The co-pilot called out, voice tense but rising. "Pressure levels are normalizing, stabilizers holding, brakes responding. Emily's heart leapt, but she didn't allow herself relief. Keep it steady, don't let up. The plane shuddered one final time as she made minute adjustments. Sparks ceased flickering. Smoke began to thin. The fuselage groaned, but the systems had stabilized. The emergency stop was now secure. She exhaled slowly, leaning back slightly, hands still trembling on the controls. For the first time, the cockpit felt still. The alarms had quieted, the flashing red lights dimmed, and the plane was stable, truly stable. The captain's hand came down on hers, gripping it firmly. "Emily, you've done it. You've saved every life on this plane. Hundreds of people owe you everything." Emily swallowed, chest heaving, exhaustion and relief washing over her. She allowed herself a small, shaky smile. "We did it together." Through the cockpit window, she could see passengers pressed against the windows, faces etched with awe, disbelief, and relief. Mothers clutched children, strangers embraced, teenagers whispered prayers, and the elderly sat frozen, finally allowing themselves to relax. Emily finally allowed herself to glance around. Sparks had stopped flickering. Smoke had cleared enough to breathe normally. The plane, battered and trembling, had survived. They had survived. The co-pilot, voice shaky, said, I can't believe what just happened. That was impossible." Emily's gaze softened, exhausted but unwavering. "Nothing's impossible when you focus, stay calm, and trust your instincts." The captain exhaled, voice heavy with emotion. "Emily, I've flown through storms, emergencies, and near disasters, but I've never seen courage like yours. You saved lives today. Real lives, hundreds of them." Emily's eyes flicked back to the instruments, double-checking everything. The plane was stable, the passengers were safe, but the reality of what they had just endured began to sink in. For a long moment, the cockpit was silent except for the hum of the engines and the faint rumble of the storm outside. Emily's fingers still rested on the controls, a reminder that she had been the fulcrum of survival. Then slowly, the cabin lights flicked back to normal, the alarm ceased, and an almost tangible calm settled over the plane. Emily allowed herself a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The plane sat on the runway, battered but intact. Outside, the storm had begun to dissipate, the clouds parting to reveal streaks of fading sunlight. The passengers, still trembling from the ordeal, slowly unbuckled, some still holding loved ones tightly, others staring out the windows in disbelief. Emily leaned back in the cockpit, exhausted, hands trembling as she removed them from the controls. Her uniform was soaked with sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead, eyes bright with adrenaline and tears she hadn't had a chance to release. She felt a strange mix of relief, disbelief, and quiet pride. She had survived. No, more than survived. She had saved everyone on board. The captain finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Emily, I've flown for decades. I've faced emergencies, storms, and near disasters, but I've never seen anything like this. You saved lives today, real lives, hundreds of them." Emily swallowed, fatigue and emotion churning inside her. "We did it together," she said softly, glancing at the co-pilot who nodded, equally shaken. "Everyone did their part, I just guided the plane." The captain shook his head. "Guided? Emily, you didn't just guide it, you commanded it. You were the difference between life and death. Everyone on this plane, every passenger, every crew member owes you their lives." Outside, passengers were slowly making their way toward the exits. Some were hugging, some were crying, and some were whispering words of gratitude to flight attendants who had supported them. Emily noticed a young boy, no older than 10, standing by the window, eyes wide as he stared at her. He clutched a small toy plane in his hands, as if offering it silently as a token of awe and gratitude. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had never considered herself a hero. She had trained, studied, and prepared, yes, but never like this. Never in real life, with hundreds of lives hanging in the balance, facing a plane that groaned under stress and a storm that seemed determined to defeat them. A flight attendant approached the cockpit door, her eyes brimming with tears. "Miss, you saved everyone, every single one of them. They'll never forget this day." Emily nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Words felt inadequate. She had survived terror, had guided a failing plane through a storm, and had landed on a military airstrip that might have been their only chance. The enormity of it pressed on her chest, and yet she felt a strange calm settling over her. She had done it. The captain broke the silence. "We need to report this immediately. The authorities, the airline, emergency services, they all need to know what happened. He paused, looking at her with admiration and awe, "you need to be recognized for this." Emily shook her head. "I don't want recognition, I just wanted everyone to be safe." He smiled faintly, understanding but firm. "Heroism isn't about wanting recognition. It's about what you do when no one else can. And today, Emily, you were a hero, plain and simple." Word spread quickly among the passengers. Mothers whispered stories of her calm in the cockpit. Strangers shared accounts of how she had guided the plane through turbulence, storms, and failing engines. Social media lights up within minutes, passengers recounting the experience with hashtags and awestruck narratives. One passenger, a journalist returning from a business trip, posted a video from row 8. Emily in the cockpit, hands steady on the controls, sweat on her brow, eyes focused like a hawk. The caption read, "This young woman just saved our lives. Row 8 hero, real-life pilot miracle on board." Within minutes, it was going viral. Emily was escorted from the cockpit, hands shaking, her heart still racing. Emergency personnel arrived, checking the plane, ensuring the passengers were safe, and assessing the damage. Yet, even as chaos and procedure swirled around her, Emily's mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking of the passengers, of the fear on their faces, of the young boy who had watched her through the window. "Miss," one emergency responder said gently, "we need to make sure everyone is accounted for. But you need to be checked out too. You've been through a lot." Emily nodded, finally allowing herself to lean back. Her legs shook and her hands were still trembling. She had faced the unimaginable and now reality was catching up. Soon the media arrived. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, reporters asking the same question over and over. "Who are you? How did you do it?" Emily, exhausted and overwhelmed, gave a small, humble smile. I trained. I did what I had to do. The crew helped and the passengers stayed calm. It was a team effort, but I'm glad everyone is safe." The public was captivated. News outlets ran live coverage, labeling her the student in row 8 who saved a plane. Social media buzzed with disbelief, admiration, and praise. Interviews captured her humility, courage, and composure. Video clips of the cockpit went viral, each replay showing her eyes, focused and unwavering, hands steady on the controls amidst alarms, sparks, and smoke. The airline issued a statement. "We commend the extraordinary courage and skill of our young passenger, Emily last name, who, during a critical emergency, took control in a moment of life-threatening danger and guided the aircraft safely to an emergency landing. Her actions undoubtedly saved hundreds of lives. We are deeply grateful." Emily sat quietly, absorbing the attention, the praise, the relief. She thought of the passengers, mothers, children, businesspeople, travelers, and felt a profound sense of connection. She hadn't just survived, she had changed lives. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains beyond the runway, Emily walked along the airstrip, taking deep breaths. The storm had passed, leaving the sky painted in brilliant hues of orange and pink. She thought of the chaos inside the plane, the fear, the tension, the adrenaline, and then the relief, the calm, and the safe landing. Her phone buzzed. A message from the captain. "You're more than a hero, Emily. You're extraordinary. Thank you from all of us." She smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. Recognition, media, accolades. They were overwhelming, yes, but none of that mattered as much as the simple fact. Everyone on board was alive. Passengers began leaving the airstrip, hugging, shaking hands with flight crew and sharing stories. Emily lingered, watching them go, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. She had faced the storm, navigated the impossible, and survived, not just for herself but for hundreds of others. The young boy from row 8 ran up to her, eyes shining. You saved us," he said, holding out the toy plane. Emily knelt, accepting it gently, her hand brushing his. "I just did what I had to do," she said softly, "but I'm glad you're safe." He nodded, wide-eyed, then ran back to his mother, still clutching the toy. Emily stood, feeling a strange mix of humility, pride, and quiet awe at what had just happened. By the time she finally left the airstrip, evening had fully fallen. Lights from emergency vehicles and media cameras reflected off the tarmac, casting long shadows. Emily walked away, still processing the incredible events of the day. She knew her life had changed forever.